What we're talking about here is the power of awareness, the power of acceptance, and letting go of the idea that we get rid of anything.
Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, wrote in 1952, "If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root some unhealthy dependence and its consequent demand." Wilson suggested that if we could identify and continually surrender these unrealistic and unrealizable demands, that we may then be able to accomplish what he imagined to be the recovery's next frontier, something he called emotional sobriety. Flash forward 70 years and join psychotherapists and best-selling authors Tom Rutledge and Dr. Alan Berger, who have taken up the mantle of exploring Bill Wilson's new frontier. Welcome to Emotional Sobriety.
Welcome to Emotional Sobriety, the podcast. I'm Tom Rutledge, and happy Father's Day. If anybody's listening to this anywhere near the day we're recording it, on Father's Day in 2022. And with me is Patrick Newman, our wonderful producer, and the father among us is Dr. Alan Berger.
That's
and
right.
You got kids all over the place.
I got kids on the West Coast, on the East Coast. And I'm thinking that's all, but you never know, right?
That's right. Well, I just want to say this. I've not ever had the opportunity to share one of my jokes that I've been trying to get to take off through the years. I often will ask women to do this. I'll say, I just want, when people ask, do you have kids? And of course, men are a little funny joke that is old, not that I know of. I just think it would be hilarious if women answered the question that way. Not that I know of, and just give that's one of those jokes so you could say it, and just that little pause afterwards where somebody's having to compute that. It's like, it's actually like a Milton Erickson hypnotic induction, to say that is enough. It's confusing. It's a confusion technique. So that you say something that's that confusing, for a moment, you actually go into a little trance.
That's right. That's right.
But you have, how old's your oldest child?
So my oldest is my daughter, Danielle, and she's 37.
37.
And then my youngest is 4.
That is a range.
That's a range. And my youngest is on her way to see Blippi. I don't. You guys probably don't know about Blippi.
I don't know Blippi.
You guys don't know Blippi because you'd have to have a 4-year-old to know who Blippi is. So
is that the new like
Barney?
the Wiggles or Barney? Is that?
Yeah,
kind of
you can think of him like that. When I was growing up, it was.
I grew up on Captain Kangaroo. Is that who you're talking about?
Captain Kangaroo. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah. Mr. Green Jeans and Bunny Rabbit and
that's Captain Kangaroo. This is a version of. This is a updated, new age version of Captain Kangaroo. Blippi is this guy who was, I think, somehow maybe had a startup company, an IT guy or engineer, and he decided to do this show for kids. Mm-hmm. And he comes in this crazy looking costume, and he takes kids on all these adventures, and it's kind of like a Sesame Street thing where he teaches them certain things and they have a lot of fun, and he's so goofy and the kids just love him. So now Blippi there's Blippi Live. So they're going to go see Blippi live in somewhere close to where we live.
That's beautiful. It's like
I'm imagining there are not going to be many fathers at Blippi Live. It's going to be all the mothers that's part of the Father's Day gift, is to take their kid to Blippi without asking a father to go along.
Yeah, I think that's a nice thing. A gift to give somebody a little relief. It's like, too often I've known stories of women on Mother's Day who complain that they have to make the Mother's Day lunch. Right, it's like that's not the point.
Well, in regards to Father's Day, and this is maybe kind of roundabout, but going off of what we were dealing with the last couple of weeks with interpersonal conflict, I have a cousin whose dad super disagrees with them about politics, and they go back and forth. And I suppose me and my dad go back and forth about the politics. And I think that part of having a better relationship with our parents and our fathers, right, is recognizing or like accepting that we're not going to look at the world exactly the same way, and that that sometimes these expectations or these like rules that we place on our parents can be barriers to us having a really meaningful connection, right? And maybe that's something that there's something for us to dig into with that, with the holiday.
Well, that's true, Patrick. I think that you've really touched on, an important thing, as we start applying these principles, these concepts from emotional sobriety, one of the major ones is to check our expectations, right? Is to really, what expectations do we have, and are they being unreasonable, and are we putting demands on people being a certain way because we think we need them to be that way, and have trouble accepting them the way they are? So it's very good. Can you say how that shows up in your life?
Oh, with me, it's just so stupid and embarrassing. Like I'll just do these. Yeah, perfect. I'll be on these text threads, and sometimes it's one-on-one, and then sometimes with multiple family members. And my family's mostly liberals, or like conservative liberals. And so I take it upon myself to radicalize them, via different means, or that's what I'm trying to do anyway. And I know that at the end of the day, there's a lot of vanity in there, and there's a lot of like me trying to, get even with somebody who it's unclear, but I'm, would like them very much to validate me by agreeing with me. And so, we just kind of go back and forth, and sometimes I get zero engagement. Sometimes I get a lot of engagement, and there's, pies are thrown back and forth. But, but I mean, I think, what it looks like. And, it's funny. One time recently, we're on our way to a movie, and I don't think I yelled, but I was like, it was a sonic level just below a yell. And I think I told my dad, like, you are not living in reality. I told him that. And then he was the emotionally sober one in that instance, because he didn't take the bait, and he was just like, oh, well, I do believe I'm living in reality, and let me break down for you, why I think is
he provided some evidence, his evidence of that he was living in reality.
Yeah, and he's living in his reality, right? Which is different than yours. I mean,
exactly. And so I think that's where, that is an example of
good catch.
The emotional sobriety baton being passed back and forth, and we need to both hold it at the same time. That would be really nice.
Let me say this too. One of the things I want to say is that, because I'm noticing the questions that we're getting more and more about what sort of for clarification about what we're talking about with the language we use for emotional sobriety is really educating me to the assumptions that I can make sometimes. And what I realize is that it's important for us to say, when we're talking about expectations, I want people to know that something I've learned is that the first time you ask yourself the question, what expectations do I have? Like if we're just focusing on our relationship with parents, or like with a father today, kind of assess what unrealistic expectations you may have been holding him to through the years or presently. The word expectation may not be the one that gets your attention. It may not feel like an expectation. I mean, because what I've learned from the Bill Wilson stuff, and then what you've done with that, is the way we know there's an unrealistic expectation is because we detect our distress. When I am distressed, I ask the question, what unrealistic expectations might I have? But it's like, I'm not immediately aware of an expectation. I'm just aware of the fact that I'm unhappy, or that I'm disappointed. And so I don't think we go immediately to what the unrealistic expectation is. Does that make sense?
No, you're saying it registers as first some kind of a disturbance, right?
Hurt. Yeah, there's a pain. There's something that hurts. Yeah, something hurts here.
That's right. And look, I think one of the corollaries of what we're talking about is having a different relationship to our feelings, right? Is to look at our feelings more as a signaling device, almost like that's giving us information that we need to unpack.
Right. Right. I mean, that's such a big piece of this, Alan. I'm repeating this because that's one of the things at the beginning of going through this, when we were first going through on Thursday night meeting on the 12 steps through the lens of emotional sobriety. When I feel distress, when I feel emotional distress, it's not check and see if you might have some unrealistic expectations. It's the technique here is actually very specific. What unrealistic expectations am I having? I promise they're there. you know, and very often they may be something as simple and as dissatisfying to us sometimes as you know, the world's not going to do what I want it to do. This person is not, you know, going to be, or what you just said a minute ago about when you're talking about Patrick's example is, no, your dad and you have different realities. So in fact, he's not living, you know, because the lesson for Patrick, if we were really looking at that specifically like that, it would be your statement, you're not living in reality, is true if in fact it is you're saying you're not living in my reality.
That's right.
That's right. It's like you're, you know, but the other thing is, what's the expectation if we dive into it deeper? I need my dad to have the same perception of reality as I do in order for me to be okay. You have to finish that out. It's like, whatever it is, I need my wife to do this in order for me to be okay. I need the world to do this in order to be okay. It's like, that's the biggest challenge for all of us, which is basically, no, we need to be able to, even when nothing goes our way, find out how can we be okay?
That resonates.
That's a challenge. That's a big one. When nothing lines up for me, you know, because that's something that our whole victim-minded society has ingrained in us. And we do double duty with this. I have no problem saying that what happened to you sucks. If something has happened, it's like, you know, we do this all the time. It's like, I want people to say, we're not saying don't feel bad about that. It's like no, there are a lot of things that happen to us that are completely outside of our control, you know, and it sucks. You know, what emotional sobriety is teaching, if I'm getting it correctly, is that does not have to mean that I'm not all right. I can still be okay. And now we got to define okay, which is, but for me, a lot of times it's that I'm still myself. I'm still connected to my value system, and I'm still learning.
What I'm hearing is that it would be healthy and helpful in many instances to let go of that fixation that those we care about, in this case, our fathers, see the world the way we do, live in our reality. And we can become more emotionally balanced, and by virtue of that, have a deeper connection with them by not fixating on that. Right?
Well, and this fits into this thing we've been talking about the last couple of times when we got on the subject of relationship and our long-term relationships. When somebody says, "What's the secret to your marriage, with a happy marriage?" Well, one of the most important, it's not a secret, but one of the most important principles is that I have learned that Dee Dee does not have to change at all for me to be okay and for me to love her. Yeah. Like, not at all. Now, does that mean, is there things that you want to have conversations with? I wish you would do this or that. No, I can. We talk about demands and preferences. It's like, no, there's a lot of things we can talk about, but the idea is, it is freedom to realize this. I don't need this person to change. Now, it doesn't mean they won't change, because people, you know, what I've learned from Roger Andes is, you know, I learned it from him, but I realized it's in my book, Simple Truth, which is each day practice accepting exactly who you are, and you will never stop changing. I think we covered that one time in one of the meetings. Is you pointed out that in the book, it's like you practice acceptance and you keep changing. Because basically what you're doing is you're letting the roadblocks go. We don't need situations to change. We don't need people to change.
You know, I notice that I do a lot of trying to get people to live in my world rather than live in their world.
By the way, I think probably we can divide that into two. There are people who do that and acknowledge it, and people who do that and don't acknowledge it. I think it's a very human nature thing to do, is to, you know, it's for us to make those assumptions. I don't think it's in and of itself. I don't think the idea of expecting other people to think like we do, or you know, I think it's our one of the things I say to people a lot is, you know, beware of times when you're using yourself as the standard of measure, because that's when we get outraged. It's like if Alan does something that I don't, you know, that upsets me, and I'm saying, I can't believe you did that. It's like, what am I saying? What I'm saying is, if I were in that situation, I wouldn't do that.
Right. That's right.
Okay. Yeah, it's like I'm using myself as the standard of measure. Well, it's like, okay, well, that's one way to measure it, but if I'm going to do that, I need to acknowledge that's what it is. Then what I'm being honest about is I'm upset. I'm upset that Alan is not more like me. Instead of
You're backing into that in a great way, Tom, isn't it? That causes so much of our struggle. I
yeah.
mean, I see it every time I struggle with, let's say Jess or somebody else in my life. It just comes back to they're not doing it the way I want them to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And rarely can we just declare that. And there is a freedom. See, that is the thing that I hope that everybody out there is hearing, that the way to get to freedom is not to jump over that step, but you gotta own it to change it. Like Tom said, if I accept I'm doing that, then I've got another possibility of not doing it. But until I look at it and own it, I can't do anything about it. I just get stuck and continue to repeat the same thing.
What we're talking about here is the power of awareness, the power of acceptance, and letting go of the idea that we get rid of anything. I want to back up just for a second because I've heard you say it this way before. You said, if I really look honestly at it, what I'm looking at is I'm upset because they're not doing it the way I want them to do it. But I think there's even more there's something even more subtle about that where we may not even be thinking of it in those terms as much as when I point out that we're using ourselves as the standard of measure, is we are making the mistake of assuming that the value system in our reality is a generalized value system. We're not having a thought that says I want this person to do it a certain way, as much as we're being disturbed and upset or hurt by the fact they're not doing it the way we would do it if we were in that situation. And so to me, it helps to shine the light on that and realize it's because a lot of times people can let go of that when they can realize that means it's the only way to respond.
And when I think of my dad, the story that I always come back to in my head is when I was struggling with math in high school before he went out to his big architectural firm job. He would wake up like a full 2 hours early. He would read my chapter of my math, whatever math studies I was doing. He would read it, like speed read it. And then he would make me get up, my lazy ass, and sit there with me and go over my homework. And basically every day he would help me just so that I could do well in the classes I was loath to do well at, so I could get into the college that I wanted to get into. And, that was the kind of dad he was, taking that extra time and sitting with me and doing some really boring grunt work that I'm sure was the last thing he wanted to do on that morning where he already had to pull a pretty long shift. And that's, to me, is like so far eclipses whatever BS.
But it may not have been the last thing he wanted to do, Patrick. See, that might be an old way of thinking about it. He probably was doing it because he loved you and wanted to support you, and that it gave him a lot to be able to be the dad he wanted to be with you. So it wasn't that it was a sacrifice.
I love that. The dad among us today is the one speaking that. That's that's an interesting perspective that speaks to what we're talking about. It's like, don't assume the other person perceives the world the way you do.
That's right. It's that, this Dr. Miller calls it our paranoia. Is we just see bad intentions in people, right? It's like we don't give them the benefit of the doubt. My hunch was your dad enjoyed doing that because he's contributing to his son's development and to becoming happy and successful in life. There's no greater reward for a father than to contribute to his son's well-being.
I will play the part of the middle ground guy. And so it was really important to your father because he loved you so much. And the other is the last thing he wanted to do. It was probably somewhere in between there.
Maybe. But it's not on, it's that thing about, can we start to give people, even if what they're doing is harmful, Tom, I've often heard you say, look for the positive intention in the person's behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, just look for that positive intention, that it's always there. It may be hidden. Right. It may be It may be that this is the only way the person knows how to express their concern and their love.
Well, it may be erroneous. We don't get to control what somebody else's intent is, and if and you're right, one of the harder things to accept, I think, sometimes is if somebody is doing something that is disturbing to us and hurtful to us, that there's a positive intent, and that's not about to let them off the hook, but it is about trying to get an awareness, and that's like this is a lot about what emotional sobriety is to have an acceptance of more and more of the big picture, the whole picture, and usually that's more complicated than our first simple version of it. Good, bad, right, wrong, black, white.
What's that Mr. Rogers quote? It's anything that's mentionable is tolerable, something like that, right?
I've never heard that. No,
that's a kind of another way to say name it to claim it, right? Is that like, we're not trying to forgive monstrous acts, but by understanding them or finding that positive motive, right, is a way of metabolizing them in a healthier way.
Well, that's a really, and when you said that, what I thought was, what I realized is wow, that challenges me. I'll say this on myself, that challenges me to say that, okay, so what that sentence tells me is I need, if I look more carefully, if I become more aware and more open-minded when I'm looking at monstrous acts, what I'm going to find is that monstrous acts are not always coming from monsters.
That's a tough one.
But
it is hard, but it's important.
There are monsters out there. We don't want to deny that, right?
Right.
Peck wrote that book, People of the Lie. But I'll tell you, when you look at their lives, and this doesn't excuse what they're doing, it just makes it understandable. There was this great show on, I think it was Netflix, called Mindhunters. And it was adapted from the experience the FBI had when they started their behavioral science unit. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to try to understand what was going on in the mind of serial killers, because they wanted to be able to start to profile that. So when it happened, that they would be able to narrow their search down and look for a certain kind of person who would have a propensity to behave like that, right? To do these heinous acts. And it's a story about these two guys in the beginning of this, working with a psychologist, going out and interviewing a lot of these serial killers. And it was fascinating. I mean, as a psychologist, I fell in love with it because it's, right up my alley and try to understand this. And I'll tell you, man, when you start looking into their past, they were incredibly traumatized. They were incredibly traumatized, and that all of their acting out was in some way dealing with that trauma, and it was a terrible way to deal with it, but it was informed by their trauma. And you could see it in every one of the cases. And then they started to define it. It was really interesting because they went from what they called the disorganized to the organized serial killer. The organized serial killer was a person that it was very, very thoughtful. They would see the person, they would identify the victim, they would make a plan. The other person would be like they were out on a date with someone, and let's say the gal they were dating would offend them in some way. And then it was very disorganized. They would respond to that hurt, right? To that narcissistic injury, that injury to their self-esteem. Fascinating stuff. But, it just goes to this stuff is that, look, all our behavior, is we come to it legitimately. We come to it as a result of the experiences we've had in our life, the culture we live in, and all this other stuff. Doesn't excuse it, but it does help us also to understand, when we're wrong and when we're behaving in a way that we don't feel good about, right? And to have some compassion towards ourselves to deal with these things.
Yeah.
It's hard to change something if you're hating yourself for it.
Right. And if you're thinking that there's, I mean, this may be a strange way to put it, but it's like if you're thinking that one of the possible answers to your question of why am I this way is that you're some kind of freak of nature. It's like the answer to that is no. I mean, I think, one of the things that you and I've said before, Alan, with this is we agree that we spend more time in therapy helping people see how they're not crazy by a long shot. And, and that's what you're describing, because what makes our job doable for me is that when I meet somebody, it's like I know already, I do, there are some assumptions that I actually do make, and I will kind of stand behind those assumptions. One of them is this person makes sense. And so that when they're describing something that they're saying, I don't understand why I'm this way, or and even if I don't understand it when they describe it, it doesn't make sense. I don't begin to question that particular assumption and think he doesn't make sense. I think I haven't figured out how it makes sense yet. And that's where that problem solving, and that's what we try to teach our clients as well, is, we really try to equip our clients with these with these tools, with these questions, is like, assume that you make sense, figure out, if and you don't have to figure every damn thing out about yourself. You don't have to understand all the whys, but sometimes it can really help. First, it helps with self-compassion. Well, of course I'm this way.
Yeah.
Of course, I tend to step back and blame everybody immediately if something goes wrong, because this is what happened to me. Now, the idea is, again, the coolest thing about acceptance is that acceptance just means I get it. That's what it is. It doesn't mean I can't now change it, because basically most of the time, I mean, sometimes we do accept things we cannot change at all, but when we're talking about ourselves, we can make changes.
Well, I wanted to share too, one thing that I've had, one of those expectations that you've had, Patrick,
Mm-hmm.
about my father being different.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of you guys, I think both of you know, and
Mm-hmm.
I think probably a lot of our listeners know, I lost my dad very early in my life. Yeah. And he developed, he had cancer for many years before we realized it in the family, meaning before it became public information,
Mm-hmm.
meaning information he shared with us and his friends and family. In fact, he told our family doctor, please don't share this diagnosis with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to upset her. That was it back in those days, in the 50s and 60s. That was very much the traditional way that men were dealing with things. They're going to suffer in silence. They want to protect the family. And, for me, I understand that, and I see where he was coming from. But for me, it deprived me and the rest of the family the opportunity to deal with these things, right?
Yeah.
And what I realized in therapy, my own therapy, when I was dealing with some of the sadness and pain I had over not being able to talk to him about, his imminent death and what that meant to me and to him, and to understand that, the therapist said to me at one point, she says, the way you talk about it is, you imagine if you talked about that with him, that it wouldn't have hurt so much. And at that moment, I realized that was a fantasy.
Yeah.
Because losing him was going to hurt no matter what. Whether it was we talked about it or not, would not have attenuated and mitigated that terrible pain that I went through. I was going to experience that no matter what. But all along, I had this fantasy. If that would have happened, then I wouldn't have felt this way. Not so. So that's the other part of this, is that a lot of times the thing that I realized is that some of the fantasies I have, if this would have been different, then I wouldn't have felt this way or that way. Not necessarily true.
You're right.
It would have been a different experience. I'm not saying that there wouldn't be a difference. There may even been some value to that difference, but it wouldn't have changed the loss.
No, we cannot, the way I put that for people, we cannot compare our life, what's happened, to some other sort of, I guess, arbitrary, hypothetical timeline that never occurred. So it's like, the idea is, what you're saying, because what you're actually saying, if you look at that from a really just kind of almost a philosophical point of view, is, when you didn't know that you were doing that, but as a kid, and as you've grown up, you stuck with it until you had this awareness, is the idea what you were wishing for was, you were wishing for something to be different. And one particular thing to be different is that you could talk to your dad about that. It's like, the rest of it is all fantasy. Is how would that have affected you? You don't know. We could guess. We might even be able to predict in some situations. We might be right, we might not be right. But that's the most important place. It brings us back to that, our friend humility, that says, guess what? First of all, she with that one question, just asking the question, what a beautiful question.
It was a
It's
great
like
question.
it just sears in there and basically shows you immediately is don't forget that there's no way you could know.
Yep, that's right.
It's so important. Well, we're kind of all over the place today, but I've enjoyed the conversation, and some of it's had to do with Father's Day, and I hope you are going to. I hope you're going to have a wonderful Father's Day.
Well, I'm already having a wonderful Father's Day. I got to hang out with Cece this morning and get her ready to go to Blippi. I got to brush her hair and put on her shoes, and so that was all wonderful. And talk to her about her excitement. She's going to her little friend Grace from school, and it's a real pleasure to watch her growing up and Maddie growing up. Maddie's current obsession is she wants one of those Pomeranian puppies.
Oh wow, yeah,
puppies. You know that. I mean, she's just looking at those, and she's got it in her mind, man. If I had this, my life would be wonderful.
Well, what she gets instead of that is Patrick and me.
That's right. She gets you guys.
Because Friday we're
fitting in a teacup though. I don't.
Right. We're not. I do not fit into a teacup. It's like, but we are looking forward to coming.
Well, listen, we're excited that this coming weekend, a week from today, actually, we will be doing a workshop out at Harmony Hollow Farm.
Yep.
And
not too late to sign up, right? If people want to come.
Not too late to sign up.
Information in the show notes.
I do hope people get signed up before Friday, because at that point in time we turn in the order for the catering, because we have a catered lunch at this workshop, and the food has been outstanding. Brad Langenberg, who does all of the coordination with Harmony Hollow Farm, has found a wonderful caterer, and she is outstanding. I love it. Makes is just great.
Well, so if anybody's listening, shares my propensity to procrastinate, and you've been thinking about coming to join us and you're procrastinating, now's the time to do it. So I always say, like, I'm like toothpaste. If you don't squeeze me, nothing happens. And so I think the idea, well, here's a good squeeze. You'll miss good lunch. It's like,
right. And listen, with every workshop I've done with Tom, people walk away from with an awful lot, much more than they showed up with. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, the workshop might be good too.
It might be good. Got a chance of giving you.
I was going with lunch, but okay, we can do that.
But lunch is great, and that's the icing on the cake.
That's right.
This is our first workshop after COVID, so it's a bit of a celebration for us.
We always love to work together, and and I'm very grateful for that, Alan. We've always had wonderful response from the workshops, and to me, I think it's for a lot of reasons, but we've discovered that we kind of have a natural ability to kind of do that together, and I think one of the most important things is it's very much like the podcast in some ways. I always feel like when we're doing a workshop, part of it is just you and I being in a conversation. And I always feel like I learned stuff from you during the workshop.
Yeah. And it's likewise. I mean,
I think we share things.
My work has changed as a result of our collaboration.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, and I'm looking forward to actually being in the same room with you, Patrick.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it too. I'll see you guys in person next weekend. We'll be off the podcast, but we'll be doing the workshop, and we'll be sure and report back with our findings. And I thought of something good to say to people who feel that they're freaks of nature, that nature's freaky.
Well, you know what I thought we could do is for the podcast, maybe is just spend some time just summarizing some of the stuff we talked about in the workshop as our podcast.
I'll make that available to you guys.
Cool.
Happy Father's Day.
Tend your life. Tend your myth. Cultivate your narrative with whomever you're with. Then with glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories. Bring your stories back to me. It ain't a crime to be a human. Never be ashamed to be yourself. Rest assured that whatever you're doing will entertain me like nobody else. So here's to us, my old friends, until it's time to drink the wine and break the bread again. With glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me.